The tendency to be more influenced by environmental influences, or more influenced by the subjective factor. That's it. And you see, there are people who are very well balanced. They're just as much influenced from within as they are from without, or just as little. And so, with all the defined classifications you know, they are only sort of points of orientation. My whole scheme of topology is merely a sort of orientation. Namely, there is such a factor as introversion, there is such a factor as extroversion. The classification of individuals means nothing. Nothing at all. This is only the instrumentarium. For practical psychologies to explain, for instance, a husband to a wife, for instance, it is very often the case, one could trust to almost say it is almost a rule. But I don't want to make too many rules. Here, in order not to be schematic, that an introvert marries an extrovert for compensation, or another type marries the countertype to complement himself. Well, there is quite a simple explanation of these terms, and it shows at the same time how I arrived at such topology. Namely, sensation tells you that there is something. Thinking, roughly speaking, tells you what it is. Feeling tells you whether it is agreeable or not, accepted or not, accepted or rejected. And intuition. Now there is a difficulty, you know. Ordinarily, how much intuition works. So when a man has a hunch, you can't tell exactly how he got that hunch, or where that hunch comes from. It is something funny about intuition. Well, sometimes, you know, you can really find out how it works by finding the intermediate links. You see, it is a perception by intermediate links, and you only get the result of that whole chain of associations. Sometimes you succeed in finding out, but more often you don't. So, my definition is, intuition is a perception by ways or means of the unconscious. That is as near as I can get. That is a very important function because when you live under primitive conditions, a lot of unpredictable things are likely to happen. And there you need your intuition. Because you cannot possibly tell your perceptions by your sense perceptions. What is going to happen? Well, you know. You have chosen a somewhat difficult case, you know. Because one of the most difficult types of intuitive introvert, the intuitive extrovert, you find them all over. Renters, bankers, gamblers. That is quite understandable. But the introverted variety is more difficulty because he has intuition as to the subjective factor, namely the inner world. And of course, that is now very difficult to understand. Because what he sees are most uncommon things, and he doesn't like to talk to them. He's not a fool. Because he would spoil his own game by telling what he sees. Because people won't understand it. For instance, once I had a patient, a young woman, about 27 or 8. She cannot possibly speak of her experiences because everybody would think she's absolutely crazy. I myself was quite shocked, and I thought, for heaven's sake, is this girl schizophrenic? Because you don't hear that kind of speech. But she assumed that the old man, of course, knows everything. And even if he understands such kind of language, so you see, if then the intuitive, the introverted intuitive, would speak what he really perceives, then practically no one would understand it. he would be misunderstood. And so they learn to keep to themselves. And you hardly ever hear them talking of these things. That is a great disadvantage, but an enormous advantage in another way. Not to speak of the experience in that regard, in that respect, is also in human relations. For instance, they come into the presence of somebody they don't know, and suddenly they have inner images. And those inner images give them more or less complete information about the psychology of a partner. You know that is. But it, of course, can also happen that they come into the presence of somebody they don't know at all, and they know an important piece of the biography of that person and are not aware of it, and tell the story. And then the hat is in the fire, you see. So the introverted intuitive has, in a way, a very difficult life. Although one of the most interesting lives. But it is difficult often to get into their confidence. It is just a sort of a skeleton to which you have to add the flesh. Or say, it is a country mapped out, by triangulation points. That doesn't mean countries consist of triangulation points. That is only in order to have an idea of the distance. And so it is a means to an end, and it only makes sense, such a scheme, when you deal with the practical cases.